Yeah, so if you haven't been on the Surf Santa Maria website, but to scroll down and see the pictures of stuff that code compliance calls and asks if they can help out somebody. You know that passage where it says somebody asks you for your shirt, give them your coat as well? It's kind of like that. Would you cut these weeds? And they end up building a fence, building a wheelchair ramp, and it's just sort of like, so thanks for listening to God though too, Carl, Okay, last session, bringing it home. Okay, so transformation, the whole church taking the whole gospel to the whole person, the whole city. And I added this section, and this part isn't in the book, but I got to thinking, that if you remember the 2nd century heresy called Gnosticism tried to value the souls of people, but not the bodies of people. And I think sometimes as evangelicals, we are guilty of the same thing. And we want to help their souls into heaven, but don't want to do anything with the body. And I started thinking about the soul too. ¿Cuántas personas hablan español aquí? Levanta la mano. Mano. Gracias. Okay. The whole person, you have to leave room for things like beauty, for relationships, for marriage. And what happens then is, if you can kind of think of the whole person, body, soul, and spirit, it's really the flow of evangelistic conversations too. You start with the external, move to the internal, move to the eternal. External, how are things going? Really bad. Well, what happened? At work, I've been working on this project for 3 months, and my boss came in and he took all credit for it, and he got a promotion and a raise, and I didn't get one, and I was counting on a little bonus to get our house. And to internal, that must really suck. Yeah, it really does. Feels like I got gut punched. Then eternal is that as spiritual people, we have the ability to pray, speak words of life into situations. Or with even believers, what do you see God doing in this situation? Are there any precedents? Maybe the book of maybe the story of Joseph or something like that. But that seems to be the way the conversations go naturally. When you break that order, it seems very unnatural. When you start off with the spiritual, with the eternal, it's just a little bit awkward. But if we really do believe that God has something to say about every area of life, that's kind of a good format to flow. The whole city, every sector and every domain, every society has three sectors. Public sector, which is government, private sector, which is business, and social sector, which are churches and nonprofits. One thing I want to just bring out is that sometimes we think that transformation is going to come from the spiritual, the nonprofit side. If we had more social services or more churches serving whatever, but truthfully, it's if you're honest with yourselves, it's the robustness of the private sector that determines the robustness of a city. And so whatever you can do, pastors, to help businesses thrive. I talked a little bit last night about job creation. The number one desire of the world is to have a good job. And when I go to churches, I might say this tomorrow, but as a church, how many jobs do you want to create? Not church jobs, but what if you got different business people? A woman that owns this business, a man that owns business, another couple that owns this business, and don't come out of the room until you create a new business. There's a book called The 48-Hour Startup. I did that with a company down in San Diego. Somebody know the name Ken Blanchard, wrote 1 Minute Manager, and I was doing some stuff in his company, and Ken and Margie were sitting in the room, and she did a little exercise, and she said, I could think of a job right now that'd be great for a single mom. She goes, tonight I'm going home, and I've got a couple chicken breasts in the freezer I was going to fix for Ken and me, but I said, I really like a nice big tossed green salad. And it would be great if I could just put in my order, and I could pick it up on the way out from work. And they started that job. Ken spoke to us the next morning, and he said, every day I speak to our 300 employees around the world, and I say 3 things. I give them a prayer request, even though they don't know it's a prayer request. I recognize an unsung hero, and I give them the marching orders today. Today I ask, how can we at Blanchard Companies create new jobs that never existed? And by the end of the week, they'd created 3 jobs, 1% in that 1 week. And because what happens is when a person has the first command of Scripture is what? It's to work. God placed Adam in the garden before he gave him a wife, is to care for it and to cultivate it and care for it. And when people are unemployed and they feel broken, there's a reason they do, because they were created to do something, to be a contributor. So God gave them creative work, naming the animals, physical work, work in the garden. But, that job creation, what a blessing to be a church that creates jobs, a community that creates jobs. So, the private sector through taxes supports the public sector, and through donations supports the social sector. So let's never minimize the contribution of our business community. We ought to be celebrating what the Chamber of Commerce is doing, Small Business Administration, and the entrepreneurs that come out here. It's a great thing. Out of those, there's commonly 7 domains. Some people have a few, 7 or 8. Some will have up to 20. But these come out of both Bill Bright, Lauren Cunningham, and Francis Schaeffer, all during the same time period, discovered that if you're going to change a city, if you're going to change society, these are the things that have to change in it. And so you have, am I on an autopilot there? Yeah, I'm on autopilot. Hopefully not. But so you have economics, religion, family, government, education, celebration, communication, and media. And then you have, and so the old model of church building was you'd look at those different domains in the community and you'd say, let's use your talents to help build my church. And so it's hey, Brian? Is Brian still around? Brian Tech, I'm going to have to play with this a little bit. But and so what happens is, hey, Brian, could you turn that, it's got an auto advance on there. Would you mind flipping that off somehow? But you'd say, that you're a business guy. Would you be the head of our finance committee? Or would you head up our building committee? If you're a teacher, would you teach our 4th grade class? And what's happening today is people are thinking much more about the kingdom, that church ought to be more like mobilizing the believers in the city to be transformational agents in whatever domain God's placed them in. And just the fundamental shift of which way the energy goes. There's a group up in Fresno, and the way that they put it this way, they put at the center are neighborhoods, schools, and families. And again, rather than, because what happens intuitively, what Christians want to do, they want to put a big cross at the center, then the cross is going to influence everything like that. Instead, they put themselves in the periphery with other good people. And so they've got business and government, social service, healthcare, education. They got the church, ecological, philanthropic, law enforcement, and they're all working together to kind of change these neighborhoods, families, and schools. And that's kind of a good diagram, but how you diagram it kind of explains where all the energy's going. So the key insight is that transformation doesn't have to come from the church domain. It can be led by any of the domains. So this guy, anybody heard of this guy? He was an engineer, Christian guy in Venezuela. And he was working with street kids, and he found out that basically the same thing that draws people to be involved in a gang are the same things that draw people to be part of a musical group. And so he started this thing called El Sistema, and it's like a little league of graduated orchestra courses. When he first had the vision, he bought 50 or somebody donated 50 music stands, and he was hoping to have 100 kids out for his first meeting. He had 11. But when he met these kids, he said, "You will one day be the finest orchestra in the world." Okay, these kids. And what happened is, the last time I did research on it was about 2 years ago, but they finished 2nd in the world as the best orchestra in the world, the Venezuela Youth Orchestra. And so here you have a guy that loves music, loves the arts, but he's using his passion to be a kingdom transformational agent in the world. Okay, so what do you love that you could turn into a ministry? What do you just love doing? If you could do anything, what would it be? I was at an African-American church a few years ago in Chicago, and we had a seminar like this, and this one woman said, she goes, "I love baking, because I'd like to teach young women how to bake bread." So the kid was sitting over here, and he said, I think every kid ought to have 3 experiences growing up. 1, they ought to go to an amusement park. 2, they ought to go to a ball game, and 3, they ought to go to the beach. And I'd like to start something that every one of our inner city kids could do to have those experiences. Well, I would never think of those things in 100 years, but what if you just kind of looked inside yourself and thought, what would I want to do? What would I feel passionate about? And then how can I turn that into some type of kingdom ministry? Have this guy, how many heard of this guy, Norman Borlaug? Okay, so he was a kid from Iowa, Christian kid from Iowa, Lutheran background. And he developed a strain of wheat in the 60s that grew low to the ground. It was wind resistant. And they took it to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, said, we're not interested, took it to Mexico, and they increased the yield 6 times. He took it over to India, took it over to China, but back when I was growing up, there was like a very high percentage of the world that was starving. When this man died, the reason I heard about him, he was in Newsweek, and the column said he only saved 1 billion lives. I read subsequent job that he saved 2 billion lives are saved because of this man. And I doubt that his church recognized him as a contributor. They probably said, well, tonight's Sunday school appreciation night, and but he's following a dream in his heart to make the world a better place. And how do we recognize the agriculturists that changed the world? He only saved 2 billion lives. There's a guy named Graham Power. He has the largest development company in South Africa. And when I was doing this global learning communities, we had a friend in that trained this guy, and his job was to kind of deconstruct companies, then rebuild them as a kingdom company. So on the door of his building, of his office, it says a kingdom company. And after apartheid, he went into the townships. He hired all locals. He brought one person from the home office, but basically trained all the people there of how to rebuild their towns. I mean, he put in the whole infrastructure of sewers, waters, and all that kind of stuff, but he did job creation. And when people find themselves responding to God, God gives them bigger ideas. And he said, I'd like to call our whole city to pray. And so for the first time, he was a rugby fan, and so he went to the owner of the rugby stadium, and he said, I want to rent the stadium for a night of prayer. And they'd never done that before, but he did it. And then the next year, they went to all of South Africa, and then the next year, they went to all Africa. But this is the man that started the Worldwide Day of Prayer. The last time I checked, they were in like 120 countries and had like 500 million people that were praying, started by a business guy. I was mentioning that story that I went blank on when I was talking about the entrepreneurship. I went to a meeting led by a woman named Kim Jordan. Kim Jordan's the founder of New Belgium Brewery that makes Fat Tire beer. And when I heard her speak, she said, I grew up in a very liberal family. My dad worked for Governor Pat Brown. We moved to Washington. We marched with King, marched with Cesar Chavez. When I graduated from college, I went into social work. And so somebody asked the question, well, what is and she said, I was very much influenced by the teaching. I went to a Quaker high school, so I was influenced by the teaching of George Fox, who said, let your life speak. And so it's been my motto to say, let my business life speak. And she described the company that she had created, so she was asked the question, well, what does being a social worker have to do with being a CEO of a brewery of 500 employees? She said, everything. She said, but social work is all about systems, and so when people are having problems, it's not a people problem, it's a systems problem. So the worst thing we might say to a person is, boy, you're having trouble learning this, aren't you? At the first anniversary of a person's employment, they're given a Fat Tire bike. At the 5-year, they're given an all-expense-paid trip to Belgium, where they kind of got their inspiration. And she said, work shouldn't be a place that you dread being. She said, work because you spend so many hours of your day there. This is a place of family. She said before they ever brewed their first bottle, she and her husband went away and they said, here's what our value is going to be. We're going to brew a world-class beer. Secondly, we're going to create a great beer culture in the U.S. that's responsible but fun. The third thing is going to be a company that loves, and then we're going to be a company that has fun. She said, we talk a lot about love at our company. And she said, and people get uncomfortable, she said because they're thinking eros. And if she had finished her sentence, she said, but I'm talking agape or phileo, if you know the difference of those words. And what happened is I sat there kind of kicking myself that why is it this woman who makes no allegiance to Christ is kind of creating a company that I'd want to go work for. That kind of atmosphere and because I was in the back of my mind, I just met with a megachurch pastor the week before. And he was talking about how everybody on his staff, man, they're towing the line. And they've got their numbers to meet. If they don't get it, they don't have a job. And I meet so many church staff that they always feel like they're one day away from being fired. And here this non-Christian company that's creating this atmosphere that much more represents the kind of kingdom I want to be a part of. Does that make sense? And so what if this became a place, that Santa Maria became the place that the businesses were run as kind of kingdom companies where, oh, by the way, and then in 2012, all the stock was was transferred to the 500 employees. So it's a what is that thing called again? ESOP, yeah. What is it? What's stand for employee stock option own plan? Yeah. And so again, it's a place where people are thriving. And so how can you create a business where the employees thrive? Because, to be, again, why should those be the worst hours of our day? Why does it have to be like a Dilbert cartoon? You have, this is all the job creation. Gallup doing the study, 150 countries, representing 7 billion people in the world. So the number one desire is to have a good job. Jim Clifton, the president of Gallup, who did the study, said humans used to desire love, money, food, shelter, safety, peace, and freedom more than anything else. The last 30 years have changed us. Now people want to have a good job, and they want their children to have a good job. And this changes everything for world leaders. Desire for a good job is the current will of the world. And whether or not you have a good job defines your relationship with your city, your country, and the whole world around you. He said being unemployed 18 months or more is the worst nightmare any place in the world. And so if you're a business person, that if there's business people in your church think, man, I'm in economy stuff, I think I might have to lay off a couple of people. How could you say no? How could you keep those people and hire 2 more this year and put other people around that person to help them restructure or cut expenses here or something like that to help grow jobs? Wouldn't that be a fun community to be part of? And by the way, so what happens is business people, I think they're so devalued. What if as a pastor, when you're discipling mentoring a business guy, say, how many jobs do you want to create this year? And their pushback might be, well, pastor, I thought we were going to talk about discipleship. And we're talking about job creation. He said, yeah, because the reason I think God's placed you here on earth is to create good jobs. And I think what you'll find out is that the business people get excited because all of a sudden what they want to give their best hours of the day to all of a sudden becomes God's will. That you're helping people fulfill the first mandate to work. And if you take care of the job, then the food, clothing, shelter, healthcare, all that kind of stuff falls into line. Does that make sense? During the 1700s, most of you are familiar with the name William Wilberforce. William Wilberforce was a politician. He worked in Parliament. He was a committed Christian, thought about going into ministry, but his friends said, no, you're going to be a bigger change agent in government. And for 20 years, basically, he fought for the abolition of the slave trade, which occurred towards the end of his life. And about 20 years later, all of slavery was ended in England. But he had a group called the Clapham Society, the group of people that were working with him. One such guy was a guy named Josiah Wedgwood. And Wedgwood was an artist. Wedgwood he's known as the father of English pottery. He also made jewelry, and when he released a piece of jewelry, all the fashionable people, the women of London needed to have that piece. And so they'd be at a party and said, oh, I see you've got the latest Wedgwood. And they'd look at it, and the thing that he created was there on the right, and it's a picture of a slave in chains, but the inscription says, am I not a man and a brother? And so people would see that and go, oh, because he was making pottery, he made spittoons, he made plates, he made all these things. And what would happen is that people would have dinner parties, abolitionist dinner parties, but you didn't know you were being invited to one. And the servants would come out and they'd serve mashed potatoes and chicken and beans and all that kind of stuff. And as they cleaned off their plate, they'd see that painting. And so little by little, so Shakespeare said, the play's the thing to catch the conscience of a king. And so just through the media of just that constant exposure, all of a sudden you think, yeah, he is a man. He's not 3/5 man. He is a man, and he is my brother. And so when you think of the role that the arts can play, and media can play, and transform society, I'd encourage the artists, and we would talk about painting over the graffiti. What if you sponsored a graffiti contest? What if you sponsored something that said, because you go to San Francisco and the murals on the wall are absolute, Mission District, are absolutely incredible. But instead of saying, oh, we're going to, I was watching a little thing last night on TV, but they just said all the tagging of the trains, it was almost an expression of, I'm here, somebody noticed me. And they were just saying, even though the subway trains, all the gang, or the people that did the graffiti back, this was like 30 years ago, would get on the roof and they'd just wait to see their train go by and then get raided by their friends. But what if you did kind of take some of the people that are disenfranchised and said, we want to have a graffiti wall, and maybe out of these 10 things, we'll keep one. The next year, we'll paint over 9 and have another one. And eventually, you have 10 great pictures of what it means to be part of this city, something like that. I don't know. But people, that people that are artists, they want to create something. I was in China. This was in 2010. And I was asked to go speak I was outside a place called New Song Village, 200,000 people, all artists, right outside of Beijing. And there was a group of Christian artists that I was with, speaking about kind of transformation and this a little bit of their work. And one of the things they did, this was in like December, and that summer, they had been to the village where the gospel first came to their province through 2 English guys, 2 English missionaries. And the people taught them to read, translated their own language into characters. It was a village language into characters, and then translated a few books of the Bible for them. And because it was a singing group, the people loved music. They just loved all the Christian music. And so they went and visited those people, and the church there welcomed them there with the songs. And then what they were doing, they were spending a year painting pictures of the reflection, these Chinese Christian artists, their reflection of what they saw up there. And that next summer, then they toured England with the exhibit, and it was called, a spiritual love for China, but they're basically saying we want to bring the gospel back to England because they brought it to us. Now, is that a cool mission for some Christian artists to be doing that? So there's a guy, Stephen Garber, and he mentors a lot of young rock musicians, Christians. A lot of Christians today, they're not doing Christian music, but they're on secular songs. The Fray is one of them. It's all made up of worship pastors out of Denver. But Stephen Garber says this. He says, how can you find ways to write words rooted in the truest of truths in our universe in a language that the world can understand? And that's the role of the artist. That's the challenge of the artist. How can you find ways to write words, paint paintings, write lyrics rooted in the truest of truths in the universe in a language that the world can understand? And so again, it may be, I think that Jesus is big enough that he's transgenerational, that he might have different lyrics for this generation than my generation would have chosen. But we need to create that environment where those lyrics can come forth, that painting can come forth, those songs can come forth, the writing can come forth. Does that make sense? The drawing can come forth. And, just encourage that, because what if God is working in their life? And that's how, God can use those things to be the center of transformation. Garber also said, he says, every time they go on stage, I tell them, you must do 2 things. He says, 1, you must identify yourself as a follower of Jesus Christ. And secondly, you must invite them to do the same. He says, they don't always do it. He said, but as their mentor, I must say that. I thought that was kind of good. And so the night I went and saw a Bono concert after I'd met Stephen, and this group, the Fray, was the lead-up band. And it was the day the world was supposed to end, May 21st, 2011. Remember that day? And that was the day of the concert. And so the leader of the band gets up and he said, well, today's the 21st. He says, we're still here. He goes, thank you, God, for the opportunity to be on stage. And bam, then they hit the song. And it was for a secular concert, it was one of the most spiritual experiences I ever had, because they figure out ways to tell the truest of truths in a language that the world understands. So there's Bono. This is actually a picture I took off the screen when he was singing. But he said, I'm a musician, I write songs. I just hope that when the day is done, I've torn off a little corner off the darkness. And, sometimes changing the world sounds so good, but there's Bono, and, he's used his influence to reduce African debt. He's always kind of using his influence as a musician to bring about some type of social change. He's identified as a follower of Christ, not necessarily a real committed church guy, but he is taking on the status quo from the point of a kingdom of God person. So when you think of those different domains, we're still on auto advance there. These are good ones. So I kind of think of, but first of all, you have to have a theology of the city. Brian. Oh, there he is. He's still there. His beautiful hair blended in with the back of the computer there. Okay. He's going to find that auto. I can, maybe. Yeah. Well, if you think so if you think about those different domains, the reason you can almost break them into kind of those with concentric circles. So the first thing, if you just drew this up for Santa Maria, but for each of those domains has a theology. What's the theology of family? What's the theology of business? What's the theology of education? And then the second thing is, what's your vision? If this were as God intended it, what would that look like? And again, I mentioned Dana Bartlett, the pastor that laid out the city of Los Angeles, because he had a kingdom view. This is what life, I think, ought to be under the kingdom for a city. The third thing you need is a leader, and a leader is somebody that says, give me this domain, just like John Knox said of Scotland, give me Scotland lest I die. That they say, I want to be the person in the city that's really influencing the media, the arts and entertainment, business, education, from a kingdom point of view. And then the last thing is you just need one example. And the reason you just need one example is because it's a starting point. So if we're meeting and I'm telling you about what a kingdom business would be, and you say, yeah, I understand the concept. Is there anybody in the city that's actually doing it? And then, Jay, I take him over to your place. And you say, here's the guy that's trying to do it. And we have lunch with him, and he's asking you a question, well, how do you do this with your employees? And what do you do this? And what do you do about underperforming employees? And what do you do for benefits? And, all this kind of stuff. What do you do about hiring relatives? All this kind of stuff. But it's sort of like, well, now I know it. Because the reason is, then you just need one example. And then in some ways, you can kind of map out where you are. So you say in family, we've got a good theology, we've got a vision, we've got a leader, and we've got a lot of examples of people that are living as the kingdom. Arts and entertainment, we have a theology and a vision, but we don't have any leaders yet that have stepped up there. Government, we're completely blank. But you can see how you almost map out where your progress is. But wouldn't it be great, though, in all those different domains, to have that thing filled out? And the reason you just need one example, it comes from an idea called the diffusion of innovation by a guy named Everett Rogers. He was from the University of New Mexico. But he said that all social change kind of follows the same curve. There's that if change comes to any society, it'll follow the same pattern. He says there's about 3% of people that are innovators. Those are idea people. They think up things. Another 13% that are called the early adopters, and those are the ones that when they hear the idea say, I'm going to do that. So there's about 100 of us here today, so between 13 and 16 of you can say, I don't know anybody's that doing this city, but I'm going to do it. That's, as much as I say, if you're committed to this, let's all stand if you're committed. Even if all of you stand, only about 13 to 16% are capable of acting upon the vision. The next group is, and here's why, because the middle adopters, before they adopt the new thing, they'll say, is this actually working any place? I need to go see an example. I understand the concept, but where is this actually working? The late adopters, the other 34% will say, I believe this can happen in, Little Rock, Arkansas. I believe this can happen in Jackson, Mississippi. I can believe this can happen in Palm Beach, Florida. But that's not the West. Are there any places in Colorado or Oregon or California or Utah where this is working? And so it has to happen in a setting like theirs. And then the last group are the 16% of laggards, and they're the last to adopt to the social change. A friend of mine says they're the last to get on board and usually end up serving on boards. And the truth of that is that they are protectors of the status quo. So in a church, your board is the one that protects the church from you going to this conference and coming back and says, we're changing everything. But then 3 months from now, you're at another conference. You go back, no, what an idiot I was to say that. No, we're doing this thing. They just whipsawing the church. So they kind of become protectors of the status quo. But let's just say, with the exception of Carl, how many pastors here preach with a coat and tie on Sunday morning? Okay, so nobody else. Okay. With the exception of you. You got a memorial to do. Right. Here's where I'm going with that. But there was a time, I taught Sunday school for 20 years in an evangelical free church wearing a coat and tie. But now you go into church, and the only one that's wearing a coat and tie in most churches are people that haven't been to church in about 10 years. And the reason that happens is at some point, the senior pastor took off his tie, wore a coat, and then he took off his coat, and then he wore a long-sleeve shirt, and then it was a short-sleeve shirt, then a short-sleeve shirt untucked. And little by little, it's jeans, all the kind of same thing. And then the congregation, you kind of say, so some people, okay, he did it, I'm going to do it. And right down the line now, everyone goes to church very casual because our society's changed. It's not like we work in work clothes all week and now we want to dress up on Sunday. We're just sort of like Sunday's our casual day. And so, but that's the way things happen. And the way that influence works, these people never look to these people for what they ought to be doing. These people, the early adopters look to the newest ideas, not just in ministry, but in business and stuff like that. The middle adopters look for examples that have happened here. They create a variety of examples that these people can find their story in here, and eventually these people either leave or they adapt. The funny thing, this is my favorite leadership diagram because what it shows is to move forward, you don't have to have consensus of 51%. All you have to do is work with the willing. So if you do start this thing, this is what you guys have done so well. You didn't wait for everybody. You say, well, let's get all the Christians together, and if 51% of them agree, we're going to go here. And that's sometimes the leadership work. If I don't have 51% of vote, I don't have a mandate to change. But on the other hand, when you cast the vision, these people will get on board. And then you help them tell their story in front of everybody else because now they're showing the proof of concept that the next 34% can get on board. And so what you do, you starve the old and you feed the new. The new is people that church isn't just a miniature theological society or a worship center, but the church becomes the platform of kingdom people to change the world. And so you showcase those stories, not the old ones of the precious fellowship that's going on here every Sunday morning. And in the evil world, we need to keep away from this. This is our safe haven, unless that's the story you want to tell. The thing I like about this diagram too, and the sad thing is that sometimes it can work the opposite way, that if these are the people that are in power, and they say that'll never work, then influence flows this way. And so these people say, well, that's what we were thinking, Pastor. And then these people here, if they're lay people, they're marginalized. If they're staff, they leave. Or if they're staff, they're let go. And so in some ways, again, to bring change, you just kind of work with the willing who's ready to work with you. So here's how, kind of for a city, here's how I think it works. With every city initiative, there's two things. You have strategic initiatives up here at the top, and then tactical initiatives down here, then partial city initiatives and whole city initiatives. And so a whole city strategic initiative is like a local congregations, parachurch organizations, missions agencies. A partial city tactic thing is a vacation Bible schools, outreach events to different domains, business groups, etc., sports ministry, age group ministries. A whole city tactical is like a Luis Palau Festival, Billy Graham Crusade, citywide service event, Jesus video distribution, etc. But up in the upper quadrant 4 there needs to be some type of leadership for the whole thing that can give leadership to the whole and appreciate the whole without competing with any one of those. And what happens is sometimes there's people that are here that will say that it's almost like they place themselves here, kind of like if you don't participate with us, you're not committed to the city. And so instead, somebody needs to be sitting up here that can appreciate the congregation of churches, all the things they do, all the parachurches, and see how they can play together on one big arena. By the way, I think Carl, that's the role that Serve Santa Maria is playing. A convening organization, lifting up the efforts of nonprofits and educators and everybody that's there, but you're not competing with any of them. You're appreciating all of them and harnessing the power. So, as miraculous as it might sound, we have finished 2 minutes early.